Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to the podcast. Today, we have a special guest, Daniel Lucas from Chattanooga, Tennessee, and he is going to talk to us all about longevity. He is founder of Sprout Spout and also Chasing Energy podcast host. I'm really happy to have him on to share his tips and insights on nutrition, longevity. And so, Daniel, welcome.
Christopher, it's good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. Briefly introduce yourself, and I'm excited to add value to the audience.
Sure. I'm Daniel Lucas. I'm the inventor and founder of the Sprout Spout. And I'm also an ultra runner, and I host a podcast called Chasing Energy.
Yeah. And we'll dive right into the question is what drove you into this area? Because you're a ultra runner,
Mhm.
and what made you go into this area?
There were a lot of health benefits being touted in recent research about the benefits of broccoli sprouts. And like most people, I was constantly trying to grow mine in a mason jar, and it was a very frustrating process. So there was this ultra nutritious thing that was available, but there wasn't really a good way to grow broccoli sprouts. In fact, you'll notice you don't find them in grocery stores. It's because they're not shelf stable. So I got really frustrated with that, and especially during COVID lockdown, I started thinking, if I'm frustrated with this, there's got to be people in upstate New York that are thinking if a pandemic should happen, or if I just don't want to go to the farmer's market for the most nutritious food on earth, I could just have it on my countertop if someone just invented a better way to create these. And that began the journey. It was 3 years, 13 prototypes, and a lot of time and money to come up with the Sprout Spout. And we released just a few months ago. It's been great for especially for people who have been sprouting in jars for years. The mason jar was invented 150 years ago, by the way. And yeah, it's had quite a run. And so this device isn't designed to do anything other than make sprouting easy. It's not a jar. It's not any of these other million features that a mason jar is. It just does one thing really well, and that's sprout.
What the you have so many things to talk about, and it's so
Hmm.
interesting because you are one thing is this idea because you're a former ultra runner, and what
Hmm.
does training have to do with longevity?
Sure. I think they both come from the same avenue, which is really, it's not about necessarily adding years to your life. It's about adding life to your years. They can keep you alive with a concoction of medicines and life support and wheelchairs. But with ultra running, it was like making the most and seeing what I was capable of. It was testing myself on a very regular basis. I was an endurance athlete. I ran 100 milers, 50 milers, 50Ks, all those. And I did it for several years and I really enjoyed it. I still miss it a little bit, but I wanted to do something that helped people at scale. And so being an ultra runner, it encouraged people, it inspired them to do things. I got lots of positive feedback when I would inspire other people to do things. But what I wanted to do was add health to the masses. And that was not, it's almost like being a personal trainer, right? You can help one person at a time, but if you really want to scale and bring health to a lot of people, you've got to do something dramatic. And so as much as I loved ultra running, as much as it taught me about life lessons, about not quitting and knowing how much I was really capable of, I wanted to do something that helped the world at scale. That was the sort of the common tide there. That was why I did the podcast. That's why I created the Sprout Spout.
Yeah, interesting.
Mm.
What are the things in because you mentioned biohacking as
Mhm.
well. What is biohacking and why is it important?
I'm a little tentative with the term biohacking, and the reason is because the word hack involves a lot of I'm going to take a shortcut to get this solution. I'm not too big on shortcuts. If you know this about me, I'm not into fad diets. And when I say that things like broccoli sprouts are one of the most powerful nutrients you can possibly eat, I drink my own Kool-Aid there. It is the amount of sulforaphane, which is like one of the most powerful antioxidants on the face of the earth. Okay. It has 50 to 100 times more sulforaphane in a broccoli sprout than a broccoli stalk. That's the major antioxidant you want. That's what does your body the major good. So when we talk about biohacking, it's really a homeopathic, organic, sustainable version, which means you don't have to worry about side effects. You don't have to worry about the downside. It's more of just you have slow, incremental, sustainable health over time. That's what I am trying to preach to people. So Not so much. I'm not the person that preaches the lose 30 pounds in 30 days. That sells a lot of ads. Maybe I should be saying that. But when I think of what I want to do as far as health, it's give people a sustainable practice that they can maintain for a lifetime.
And I was actually read this fascinating Instagram post the other day, and it was talking about longevity. So what are people doing in the longevity space to excel in this area?
In which area specifically?
Yeah, for example, just they're talking about living longer, living
Oh, yeah.
healthier.
It just depends who you follow, Christopher. There's some really great people out there that are doing great work. Brian Johnson is probably the most famous person right now. He's known for like the pale guy with the red hair that's aging backwards. His protocol is not sustainable by most. I think it's something like $50,000 a month or some crazy number. In terms of supplements and like red light, the therapy and the laser treatments and all these things that he gets. But what he's doing is very similar to what I'm doing, which is I'll pave the way and you just learn from my mistakes and pay very little. So, for example, it doesn't cost much for you to put, if you go on to sproutspout.com and order one, it doesn't cost very much. I can promise you it took a lot of money to bring that to life. If I knew how much it was, I probably wouldn't have done it. But with what people like Brian Johnson and some of these others are doing, what I get from it, Christopher, is that you can, what's the word I'm looking for? You can be selective about what works with your life and say, ooh, there's something. When, you know, right now the big thing is a lot of people are going on the carnivore diet and things like that. And that's stuff where I think if you need to lose a lot of weight, it's an effective tool. But for someone like me, I'm more about I need energy and vitality, and I need to be able to exercise, and I need to be able to recover, and I need to be able to think well. So you will notice I don't preach anything dramatic. There is no starve yourself for 3 days and then drink lemon juice water with cayenne pepper or something like that. I'm a stoic person. I study the Stoics, and temperance is a big part of my personality, which is temperance is find that balance between the extreme and the minimal and find your balance in those.
Yeah. A lot of people, what are your views on fasting? Is
Yeah,
it healthy?
I used to fast. I used to do regularly, I think once a month, I would do a 48 to 72 hour fast, and I liked it. The problem for me was that I was a pretty competitive athlete at the time. And I can tell you, if you fast 2 or 3 days, it takes almost like 8 or 9 days to get back into training shape. That doesn't, for most people, they won't notice that. But for someone like me, you're so lethargic the first 2 or 3 days you start eating food again that you're sluggish, you're slow, and then it starts going, and then you can start getting back into your training, and then you're back to where you were about 10 days ago. So I remember it just really derailing my training. So I would try to do it during the off seasons. I'm not opposed to it, but I will tell you this. I think I stepped away from it a bit, and here's why. After the age of 40, the amount of muscle that you're able to maintain has everything to do with your longevity. There's two factors that are extremely tied to longevity. Your VO2 max and the amount of muscle mass that you have. Now, I know you can sit here and say, Daniel, these bodybuilders don't live a long time. Remember what I said about temperance? It's finding that sort of middle ground. So muscle mass and strength. But VO2 max is what you get from your long distance aerobic or high intensity aerobic efforts. So with those two things, I focus on those now versus the fasting because in large part, when you fast, you will, regardless of what they will tell you, you do lose muscle, and it is very hard to get back into strength training. So you're almost out a week if you do 48 to 72 hour fast.
Uh-huh.
Doesn't mean I'm opposed to it. I'm just cautious with it, especially for people who don't have extra muscle to spare. So remember that one of the number one killers in people is falling. If you're fortunate enough to make it to the age of 70, falling and breaking your hip is almost a death sentence. So what you want to do is you want to have the strength that if you trip, you can actually have two things. The speed to stick your foot out in front of you and catch yourself. That comes from your VO2 max, that fast reaction. And then the strength from your muscle mass to be able, so even if you put your foot out in front of you, you have the strength to catch yourself from going downstairs, from breaking your hip or falling, whatever. Those are two things that I prioritize right now.
Interesting.
I would say at least to answer to wrap up your question about fasting, at least once a week, and I don't necessarily do this intentionally, at least once a week, I think I go about 12 to 16 hours without food. And it's usually something where, like Christopher, where I get up and I have a cup of coffee and I'm in meetings for a while, and then I'll go for an hour and a half run and I'm still on empty. It doesn't bother me to run on empty for an hour and a half. And then I'll come home and it's like noon and I haven't eaten since like maybe 7 o'clock the day before. And I don't really notice it because I'm so busy. So I think at least once a week, I'll end up at about 16 to 18 hours.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I tried the 24 hours and it took me about a day or two to I remember being very sluggish and a little bit just tired. What about the other question is,
Dr. Walter Longo has the fasting mimicking diet, if you want to look into that.
yeah,
I've done it several times, and it's where you basically go down to, I think it's 500 calories a day. And so the first day you do 1,000 calories, the second day you do 500, and you do 500 for 5 days, and then you go back into your regular diet. He claims, and he has some good science, that it's the same, has the same benefits as fasting with mitigating some of the catabolic muscle loss. But again, I think that's one of those things you can experiment, see how you feel. You lose your hunger after about a day. So I think it's about 40 hours in, you won't even want to eat after. It becomes to where you're not even hungry anymore.
yeah,
Having said that, you at about 70 hours in, just going up and down stairs or driving is almost like, oh, I got to build up some energy to do this.
yeah, interesting. How about sauna and cold plunge?
Absolutely. All the time, dude. All the time, Christopher.
Yeah.
One of the best investments I have ever made, I've had it for about 16 months now, was I got a 6-person sauna. It's the traditional barrel sauna. And honestly, when I got it, because of some issues with getting the electricity hooked up, it ended up sitting in my backyard for like 2 months with not being turned on. And I really did think, I thought, I might have wasted my money on this thing. I'm over it at this point. I'm frustrated. I've had 2 electricians out here. Boy, did I eat those words and gladly, because once we got it working, I have used it nonstop since. And you might think, oh, you just got it. No, I've had it for even during the summer, and the summers in the South are brutal. I would still go in there probably 2 nights to 3 nights a week in the summer and sweat it out. But now that it's nasty and rainy here every other day, I go in there almost every single day, sometimes 2 times a day.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Longevity wise, it is the most powerful thing you can do outside of diet and exercise. And that's not my opinion, that is the science. And there's also a lot of science coming out that it is also one of the best preventive measures against Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Now, I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's because the toxins you sweat out. I don't know if it's because the vascular activity that takes place is so good for the heart and brain. I don't know. I don't think they know the answer to it. But what they do know is there are a lot of studies, especially for people in European countries that go to sauna all the time. And they're able with those studies to separate out the people who do versus don't go very clearly, which means, and they've tracked this data for a long time. They're very able to separate, you know what, if they're going to the sauna 3 times a week, I think is the number they shoot for. If they go at least 3 times a week, they end up having not only a better quality of life, but several years added to their life and then a reduction in cognitive diseases.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Talk about trade, because I know you do distance marathon and running.
Yeah.
For the people that the impact, what about things such as yoga and Pilates? Because I know people that's been shown to have a lot of benefits as well.
Okay, so is the question, what is the impact of yoga and Pilates, or how does this relate to ultra running? What's your question?
The people that can't do bad knees or bad backs and
Oh, yeah, sure. So I don't preach ultra running to people. I don't even preach running to people, to be honest with you. What I do preach is that I'll keep my protocol very simple. 1 hour of activity a day is what I consider to be the foundation for living a healthy life.
yeah.
Now, you might say, Daniel, am I supposed to strength train? Am I supposed to bike? And the answer is very simple. It's the thing you will do, right? So if I sit here and tell you Pilates is the healthiest thing you can do, and you're like, ugh, I hate Pilates, dude. I really hate Pilates. Then it's like you're going to hate it the whole time you're there. But if I just say 1 hour of vigorous activity, it could be hiking in nature. It could be spinning in a Peloton class. It could be in a Pilates class. It could be running on a treadmill. 1 hour is ideal. What I will put in there as a caveat is that I will argue and defend that if you happen to spend some of that hour surrounded by nature, your mental health will be better off. And so I will specifically say, I'm sorry, but running on a treadmill for an hour is not the same as running in the woods for an hour. It's really the mental therapy you get from it. And I recently read several books that kind of back this up, where they actually stress tested people I think in Japan, it's called forest bathing is what they call it. And they checked their blood pressure. They looked at their blood lipid markers before and after they do these forest bathing walks. And it just reiterates what we already know, which is if you surround yourself with nature, your stress and anxiety are down. If you surround yourself with screens all day, guess what? It's not going down.
Yeah. Really interesting. And I know you have a section on diet and you talked about those areas. What are your thoughts on carbohydrates? Because people say carbs, inflammatory, bad for you. What are your thoughts?
That is absolute loaded gun. And so here's what I'll say about carbohydrates. And before I answer this, I want you to keep in mind, I did a low carb diet for 10 years and I was a distance runner. I would say my personal opinion is the reason that carbs are demonized is because they are a high energy source. And it's also, if you look at processed foods, it's the first macronutrient that is in a processed food. Why? Because corn and grain are the two cheapest things to turn into snack foods. So any of your snack foods in the middle of the grocery store, not the outside perimeter, are almost always made out of corn and grain, and they're processed and heated and shaped into a place that gives you a texture when you bite it and makes a sound when you chew it. So carbs are demonized. And what I would argue is that don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's a lot of wonderful carbohydrates. And the reason that they're demonized is because if you're looking for a dramatic weight loss, they are an easy button to hit. But it always comes at a consequence. And my advice to people is, again, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Look at the quality of the carbohydrates. If you want to know a cheat on that, it's if it contains fiber. If it's a natural carbohydrate, I'm going to say sweet potato. I am shocked. And this is coming from someone who was a low carb athlete, not just a low carb person, a low carb athlete. If you buy mini potatoes, and MINI, it's not MANY, get 6 mini potatoes, which is one serving. And I think it's like 120 calories. I dare you to eat 6 mini potatoes with some vegetables, like some sauteed spinach, and I don't know, a big ass piece of chicken. You will be so full for 3 or 4 hours. Now, I know that people will say, what if I just eat the chicken and the vegetables? I'd say you're probably going to find yourself an hour and a half later going, man, I need something else for a quick hit of energy. That's up to you. It's not like I tell people you have to be low carb. And the good thing about the sprouts I sell, even the mung bean sprouts, don't actually, people don't believe me when I say mung beans are actually almost carb free, because when they sprout, they end up basically becoming an indigestible carb, and it's more fiber than anything. So the net carbs on them it's almost like a keto food. So broccoli sprouts, alfalfa sprouts, none of those really have any carbs. They have a little bit of protein and they're very filling. So I preach, if you want to have something if you're going to go to a dinner party around, like right now it's around Christmas, have a salad that has some fat, a lot of fiber, and a little bit of protein. I recommend, if you're going to a Christmas party, have at least 10 to 15 grams of protein with your salad. You'll get to that Christmas party, and it's going to be all junk food. It's going to be complete junk food, pigs in a blanket and crackers and whatever. You're going to be so much less tempted to eat that if you spend 10 minutes having a healthy snack before you go, because you don't have to tax your willpower when you have already put that snack, a healthy snack in your belly, you won't be as weak and tempted to fill up on those junk foods.
Huh. You've had a lot of philosophical influences, and
Yeah.
a lot of people, you're talking about
Yeah.
Spartan versus Stoicism.
Yeah.
What's the difference and how do they impact you
Between Stoicism and what?
in a Spartan lifestyle?
A Spartan lifestyle is a minimalist, only one thing matters type thing. Sleep on the floor. I'm not a minimalist. What I will say is, I know this isn't a financial podcast. I'm not preaching finances to you, but I'm a financial person. And I will say living beneath your means is one of the Spartan things that you could potentially take. So sorry. And so Spartan is one of those things. Stoicism is, to me, it's a compass. And what I do with Stoicism is my favorite, he doesn't claim to be a Stoic, I don't think, but my favorite Stoic is who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And I read it every couple of years. One of his statements, and this is how I sum up Stoicism: between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in the space is your opportunity to make the choice. And that choice is what determines your legacy in life. When you have a stimulus, and a stimulus might mean someone cuts you off in traffic, or I have two teenagers. Do you think I don't have stimulus all the time when they say something to me where I just want to snap? But I encourage people, when it comes to Stoicism, it doesn't say not to be emotional. It just says don't let the emotions dictate you. An example of that in the Bible, there's one particular scene where Jesus loses his temper in the marketplace and breaks all the tables because they have a market out in front of the church.
Yeah.
And I look at that and I go, he was being stoic because he knew exactly what he was doing to send the message that this was not okay. It wasn't like he just did it out of spite. With Stoicism, I think about Marcus Aurelius. If you've read Meditations, that's another great read. Ryan Holiday. If you just want Stoicism in digestible bites, pick any Ryan Holiday book. He writes really great books. Discipline is Destiny was the last one I read from him. I finished it a few weeks ago, and it was actually probably one of his better ones. I don't think it had the sales that some of his other books did, but I think it's because it was very straight to the point. And that is that learn to love the work. This idea in the current generation of like, how do I get to a point where I just don't have to work and someone else does the work for me? It's not a fulfilling endeavor. It's not sustainable. Learn to love the work. Fall in love with the process. Don't let emotions dictate where you go. Temperance is a big part of that as well. That's a big part of the Stoic philosophy. Christopher, I'm in a startup, dude. Every day I wake up, I feel like all I have to do is stop believing and it dies right now. There is no entity that continues on if I don't believe in it. And I've never had to do that because my whole life I've been a corporate person. And when you're a corporate person, you don't have to support the whole company. You just basically do your part. You're a cog in the system. I'm not anti-corporate, by the way. I'm just saying the corporate wheels turn with or without you.
Yeah. Lastly, talk about the concept of a second mountain. What does it mean to you? And
David Brooks. Yeah, man, the second mountain. What a great concept. I don't know if you want to say how old you are. I'll say how old I am, Christopher. I'm 47. And I'm a very philosophical dude. I've had an interesting couple things in my life, but I will tell you that especially if you're a philosophical person, Carl Jung, the philosopher, psychotherapist, he's famous for talking about your shadow. If you ever hear the whole thing about your shadow persona, he's the one who developed all that. He had some phrases where he talked about how a man's mind changes after the age of 40. And if you read any of Arthur Brooks, which is like Strength to Strength, it's an incredible book. He talks about the same thing before 40 and after 40. And why are we talking about this? That's because often your second mountain comes after 40. I'm not saying when it specifically comes, but for me, 40 was a very big tipping point. Well, Arthur Brooks brings up a good point. When you're under 40, you have a plethora of what's called fluid intelligence, meaning you can think quickly, you don't need a lot of sleep, you can outwork and out hustle the people around you. But after 40, it starts to go away. This was the basis for the podcast Chasing Energy, which was how do I make the most of the very limited resource that is energy? And so after 40, you get what's called crystallized intelligence. Crystallized intelligence is where hopefully if you've put in the reps and you're an insightful person and, journaling helps a lot. I'll say that. You've learned these are the things that work for me. These are the things that haven't worked for me. And you start to be more selective with your efforts. Okay. If you look at the history of Nobel Prizes, what happens is they tend to get them when they're young. They don't tend to continue that work when they're old unless they learn to use fluid intelligence. It's adapting to the second mountain is where you take a step back and go, look, I'm not going to be able to out hustle my younger self. I'm not going to be able to outwork my younger self. But what can I do that's going to make a bigger impact on the world and my legacy than doing nothing, than resting on my laurels? So the second mountain is about finding purpose. When you've already achieved the American dream, for example, the kids are no longer reliant on you. Maybe they're going off to college and you've made VP at the office and you get your 4 weeks of vacation a year and you find yourself, maybe you're 50 years old and you're listening to this podcast and you go, now what do I do? I'm not ready to hang it all up and I'm not what I used to be. So what do I do with myself? That's what the second mountain is, re-identifying what it is that gives you a sense of purpose. We're circling back around to Viktor Frankl here because he argued with Freud. At the time, it was controversial. It's not controversial now, but Freud argued that the man's meaning, the reason that we exist, was pleasure. And Viktor Frankl argued that it's not pleasure, it's purpose that motivates man. Man needs a purpose in order to have a fulfilling life.
Yeah, excellent. How can people follow you and reach out to you and find out more about your company?
The easiest way to find out about the company is just to give us a visit at Sprout. It's just one word, sproutspout.com. At Instagram, it's the Sprout Spout. But the easiest way to connect with me is at DP Lucas on Instagram. Give me a DM or a follow or whatever. I post my thoughts. I post clips from the podcast and stuff like that.
Awesome. Thanks so much and keep up the great work.